The Hempen Jig, Part 2. How I slept, I don't know. The next morning I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The shock of seeing the ugly black and purple welts wreathing my neck cast away any possibility I had imagined this. The flesh was bruised, damaged, impossible to imagine or to make believe. The rest of the day I spent at the local library. I was reluctant, for many reasons, to stay at home on my own. On the way out, however, on an impulse I knocked on John's door and asked if he knew the names of the people who had lived in my flat before me. I spilled my guts about the sleepless night I'd just had. He was very helpful and actually quite kind, noting with some concern my red-rimmed eyes and even offered to drive me, though I declined in favour of walking. John named Sam Finch, Julio Saldana and Gerald McElvey. "Be careful," he frowned, patting me on the shoulder. "It was probably just a nightmare. Just remember to look at the big picture, okay?" Before I went to the library, I went down to the local doctor's to get my burn checked out. It took hours. I hadn't registered yet and spent the majority of my time filling in paperwork impatiently as a sour-faced receptionist brought me form after form. Finally, I got through to someone, a Dr. Ali. "That looks painful," he observed flatly as he disinfected my wound. "A rope burn, is it?" I acknowledged this was true, but it was not self-inflicted. I fudged the truth, passing it off as a sailing accident. "Must have been a big boat," he said, "and in future I would avoid putting your neck into any kind of noose, even as a joke." Then I headed at speed to the library. The names I'd been given ricocheted in my brain as I pored over archives of local newspapers and tore my way through web page after web page. I hunted with a madman's determination. For what? I wasn't sure, but part of my mind told me I needed this. I started by researching the execution dock in the area. History yielded little. I found the name Talbot, but there was nothing about a ship or a crew, and there must have been 30 or 40 Commodore Hodges in the last 300 years. Strangely, the only disturbing nugget of information was about the names John had given me. Each one of them had indeed moved out of my home, but other news reports from a month or so later showed there was something they had in common, specifically the cause of death. All three were found hanged in their new homes with no signs of struggle. My hands shook as my eyes took in the morbid details. They shrieked about madness, voices, and all kinds of awful things that happened to them every night, and it had driven them to the noose. I swallowed hard, my hand finding the bruises on my throat. They had seen what I had seen. Talbot and his crew. But no, it was all nonsense. It had to be. "That's bullshit, and you know it is," part of me said grimly. "You know there is something that wants to hurt you." I needed a drink, I decided. Part of me insisted I go straight home, but I found myself walking at speed to the Anchor. A few whiskies, and I would be okay to sleep that night. The barman frowned at my bruises over the drink-sodden bar top, but paid it no mind as he served me a small glass of tepid scotch. I drank until the shakes of my hands stopped, and by my table at the window watched the peaceful waters of the Thames roll by. I felt almost serene, as if I'd only been dreaming all of this stuff. When I left, the sun was dipping below the horizon and the pale fuzzy moon was only just in the sky. The temperature had dropped and a mist was rolling in off the river. I'd been fortified by the whiskey, and so walked with brisk boldness through the mists down the waterfront. The booze could only do so much. I felt unsafe, more so with the light disappearing and the mist surging across the path at unnatural speed. After 5 minutes, I could barely see 6 feet in front of me, the mist, fog really, shrouding the riverside. I bunched my coat around myself and tried to spot the various minor landmarks I used to pinpoint my way home. My concern grew as I searched for the lamppost that marked the beginning of the residential area where my building waited. The light should be on by now, and I couldn't see a damn thing in the mist. I could see something, however. That great big pile of rock silhouetted in the foggy waters just beyond the railing. I gritted my teeth. That bloody thing wouldn't let me go, would it? I walked past and, encouraged by the liquor in my blood, spat into the water. I don't know why I did it. I just wanted to give it a big screw you, I guess. I still could not see the lamppost. I could see outlines, pencil-sketched borders of buildings, but none I recognised. I stopped at a mock Georgian archway into a private residence and realised that no, this was not it. I had to have made a wrong turn, and as angry as it made me, I had to return to the gibbet. I doubled back, only to find that I wasn't sure which direction I was now facing. I swore over and over as it grew more dense around me. The river was invisible, only the skeleton structure of the railing could be seen. I could hear the heave and pull of the waters, smell nothing but damp in the air. Not unusual for This close to the river, you'd think this was different. It was damp that came from the darkest corners of the deepest cellars, from sumps that lay in the furthest pools of the deepest mines. Fear pierced my heart as I wondered if I had somehow gotten lost. Then I saw the flickering lights and laughed at myself with relief. The street lamps hadn't gone on, that was all. I soon got my bearing and began to follow the lights. The lights were unusually bright and seemed in the fog to be higher off the ground than usual, but I paid the thought no mind. It only came back when I saw to my horror that the lights were flickering off one by one, plunging the riverside into darkness. Was this even the riverside anymore? I couldn't even see the bloody railing. Practically blind, I felt in front of me and found myself against a brick wall. Thank God, at least the houses had not gone. The lights had all but winked out now, and around me the houses seemed ever larger and more menacing. Everything seemed ill-defined and slightly ethereal. Footsteps in the mists gave me a start, steady sounds that echoed on the cobbles. Not that I felt any fear at that moment, despite my experiences. "Hello?" I called out. "I'm not sorry, can you tell me where I am?" No reply, and that was when I began to feel that fear. The footsteps stopped. I saw and heard nothing. Then my eyes adjusted to the gloom, and the reality dawned that there was something out there in the fog. I could make out the vague shapes of men. These men just stood there, unmoving and stiff. They were definitely there, and yet I could not focus on them. None of them seemed to stand up straight either. Some were cocked at curious angles, clothed in tatters, and some of them stared up at the sky. It was then I began to panic. Of course they couldn't look at me. Their necks were broken. I ran, a fumbled, pathetic series of movements that took me down an alley and across a residential street, praying those stumbling abominations were not in pursuit. After 5 minutes, I breathlessly reached the edge of a park and looked behind me, only to see the lights of the street coming on. Soon the world was lit up again, although still foggy, and I could make out the glowing pyramid of Canary Wharf's apex in the distance. My joy and relief were almost palpable, as I quickly knew exactly where I was, though how I'd gotten there was a mystery to me. No more figures in the fog, no more misleading lights. I still ran home though. The mists were clearing a little as I reached the main doors of my apartment block. The lobby was, as usual, empty as I climbed the stairs wearily to my flat. I'd barely eaten all day, and I'd been drinking quite heavily and I was exhausted. No wonder I'd been bloody seeing things. I'd stupidly just about convinced myself I'd imagined everything in an alcoholic haze when I reached the 4th floor, fumbling for my keys. The light suddenly, with no warning, went out. In my chest, my heart skipped a beat as I was plunged into blackness. No mist this time, just pure, unsullied darkness. The air was cold and damp, but I felt the hot sting of fear prickle me once again in that impenetrable gloom. Had it followed me home? I'd seen nothing when I got back. Nothing. I stumbled and reached out to stop myself falling. But instead of the plastered wall I was expecting, I felt something else under my fingers. It was soft and warm, and with shaking hands, I withdrew my phone so that its puny light could illuminate what I had touched. A small cry escaped my throat as I saw bruised purple flesh, yards of the stuff, pulsing gently under the light of my phone. In all directions I pointed the feeble light, and all I saw was a dark, great blackened bruise that encircled the entire corridor. Why I stood still for so long I have no idea, because I finally goaded my numb feet into action. I began to run, desperate to get down the corridor to the sanctuary of my flat, but I couldn't see a damn thing. My feet were weirdly unresponsive too, and ice cold to the tips of my toes. It was only at the point that I ran I realised my feet were squelching with damp. Then my heels felt icy cold as the rising water that had been gathering behind me began to flood in a great dark tide around my legs. Running became more difficult as the water rose. The sharp sting of rotten fish and mould assaulted my nostrils, and I became more disoriented than ever, with fear burning through my chest like a shrieking firework. Dear God, I don't know how I got down that corridor. I reached John's door first and hammered it furiously with cold, numb fists. Nothing. Unbelievably, for the first time in weeks, there was no answer. The current was stronger and almost took my feet from under me. I reached my door as the water was almost on my waist, and my frozen hands had to work furiously at the lock. The lights flickered, and I looked up at the lights in the hope this was all some sort of hallucinatory invention. Shrieking in horror, begging for help, what a sight I must have seen, but when the fear takes hold of you and squeezes, you have little choice but to sing its tune. Another flicker of the light showed my horror was far from false. Water flowed blackly down the passageway, but worse and what made my stomach churn were the blackened silhouettes standing in the water. The shadows of the mist made flesh. Awful ghosts, rotten things, standing there grinning at me as I desperately tried to force my key into the lock. Then a pair of hands locked around my shoulders and I was jerked back from the door. As I looked up, I saw an image from my worst nightmares. A smirking, decomposed face, flesh puffy and waterlogged, its baleful white eyes filled only with one desire: to destroy me in any way it could. It had to be Talbot. Part of my mind told me as he dragged me underwater, and yet there was a sting of familiarity about that face. I'd always been scared of drowning, and being forced into the icy deluge that now seemed to take up my whole world almost pushed me beyond insanity. In a last desperate attempt, I kicked out with my feet and felt the vindictive corpse loosen its grip. Water was all around me now. I tasted foulness in it and swam upwards. Breaking the surface, I was opposite my door again. In one final effort, I forced my key into the lock and twisted hard. A hand touched my foot and I screamed out one last time, begging to be left alone, to be shown mercy. Then I fell forwards onto my perfectly dry carpet. The water gone, the corridor lit and just as it should have been. I passed out, unable to take any more. You win, I thought. I'm leaving. It took me 3 days to sort everything out. In that time I had no more night visits from Talbot, nor from any of his ghastly crew. I didn't care what price I had paid or the fact that I was getting no deposit back. I was just thankful that it was over. My landlord came up to see me off, shaking his head sadly as the last of my boxes was taken downstairs. Another one. It's going to be a pain in the arse renting this place yet again. I decided not to mention the fate of the previous occupants. Then I suddenly remembered something. I should probably go and say goodbye to my neighbours before I go. My landlord frowned at me. Who? I explained about my neighbours and our friendship, but I was puzzled to see him shake his head. No couples living here. Or next door, actually. It's been empty for a year or more. I sank to the floor. No, that couldn't be. It couldn't be true. I'd spoken with them, for fuck's sake. I demanded to be proved wrong, to see the flat. Begrudgingly, he did so. He unlocked the door and took me into an empty, unfurnished set of rooms. I stood numbly, staring at the empty flat where I had barely a few days ago enjoyed brandy and dinner with a kindly couple. The landlord reluctantly told me that a couple had lived here, but they never made it home one night. They drowned in the Thames. Suicide, apparently. They were the Talbots, he told me. John and Pamela Talbot. So no, I don't believe in ghosts. Ghosts do not plan and manipulate, scheme and invent. As I write this, I'm still trying to understand what I experienced, what I saw. The landlord filled me in the rest of the details. They drowned in a boat accident on the Thames after losing their home to debt. The boat had been found wrecked nearby some days after, apparently having hit that great pile of jagged rocks near the river. Nasty name for a boat too, the landlord said. The Dark Serpent of all the maudlin names they could have chosen. John's kindly smile rises in my mind now, seeming sinister in its intent. So no, I do not believe in ghosts. I believe in something else.